Kuzampula. Welcome to Bhutan e-learning project. I'm Kalpana Giri from Yangchenpo Higher Secondary School, and today I'll be taking you through a geography lesson, Key Stage 4, which includes classes 9 and 10. And today's lesson's topic is on agriculture. So agriculture topic you have already done in your previous lesson, and that time we have discussed the background of farming system in our country. We also looked at the types of farming that we have in our country. Then we also looked at the land production system, and we also learnt about the agroecological zones. So today we will continue further with the lesson. So before the lesson, I have few lesson objectives that needs to be fulfilled at the end of the lesson. So the first lesson objective is, by the end of the lesson, you should be able to list down the major crops of Bhutan. Second one, you should be able to explain what is cropping pattern. Then you should be also able to differentiate between traditional and modern farming practices. Then finally, at the end, you should be able to explain the challenges to farming. Okay. Now, what are some of the major crops of Bhutan? So, here I have listed down major crops of Bhutan. So, the first one, there are 4 categories of crops. So, the first one we have cereals, which includes paddy, maize, wheat, barley, millets and oats. Then second we have legumes and oil seeds, which includes peas, beans and mustard. Then we have vegetables, potatoes, chilies, ginger and etc. Then finally we have fruit trees like apple, citrus, areca nut and mango, and there are so many other fruit trees. So it is clearly shown in the picture, the 4 categories of crops. Among the cereals, rice and maize are the most important crops. Then potato and chili dominates as a cash crop vegetables for our farmers. Then citrus is widely grown in the subtropical climate condition, and then while apple predominates in the temperate regions. Okay. Now, let us look at what is cropping pattern. So, what is cropping pattern? Cropping pattern means distribution or cultivation of crops in time and space. And in simple, it is also an arrangement or pattern of crops grown with the objective of maximizing production from a unit of land. So here now in time means crops are grown one after another. Example, vegetables are grown after rice harvesting. Then in space means growing either single or varieties of crops together in vast land. Example, only maize is grown over the entire land, or along with maize there are other types of vegetables are also grown. So look at the picture there. In the left hand side, the field is covered with maize, and other side again there is one type of vegetable there. Now in the arable agriculture sector, there are 2 predominant production systems. So they are the dry land production system and the wet land production system. Rice based cropping pattern, where the rice is main crop in wet land production system, and in the dry land production system, maize based cropping patterns are followed. So here I have a few examples of how other vegetables are grown after rice harvesting. So for high altitudes, rice Then after rice harvesting, then vegetables are grown. So you can see in the slides. Now let's look at maize based cropping pattern. See, for high altitude zones, that's in Drepung in Mongar, after maize is grown, the field is kept fallow, then maize, then after it's barley, then maize and mustard. So it goes on with other altitude zones. Now let's talk about farming practices. Farming practices in a broader level, it includes types of farming which would involve all uses of all agricultural resources like land, water, soil, inputs like seeds or animal breeds, fertilizers, and uses all husbandry method to enhance production. Now let's look at the farming practices. So first one we have is livestock farming. So livestock farming is rearing of livestock for one's own use, like we use meat, egg, milk and wool for our own purpose. Then we also have organic farming, in which farming of crops to livestock and other forest products like medicinal, aromatic plants and herbs, or farming done without using chemicals. Then we also have conventional crop production, which is also known as industrial agriculture. It includes horticulture and cereal crops. So here horticulture means growing of flowers, fruits and vegetables, and also growing of plants, aromatic plants for ornaments and for fancy purpose. Then finally we have aquatic farming, which includes fish farming and farming of aquatic plants. So here in the first picture you can see livestock farming, second picture you can see organic farming, in third you can see a picture of horticulture, and then finally we have fish farming there. Now let's talk about the differences between traditional and modern farming. So here traditional farming is a farming practice in which traditional method and knowledge are used, which has been passed down from generation to generation, where in the modern farming practices it uses sustainable farming principles and advocates on environmental health and ensures economic benefits. So now let's look at some of the differences between traditional and modern farming. So here I have few differences. In traditional farming, farmer uses manure and compost, whereas in modern farming, farmer uses chemical fertilizers. In traditional farming, farmers need more laborers because they don't use machines to do cultivation, whereas in modern farming, farm laborers are needed in a minimal number, whereas they use more of machines. Traditional farming, farmers depends on seasonal rain for irrigation, whereas in modern method of farming, they have a well set up of irrigation system and they do not depend on seasonal rainfall. In traditional farming, farmlands are plowed by animals, whereas tractors are used for plowing the field in modern farming. Production is less, but the crops are of high quality in traditional farming, whereas in modern method of farming, production is more, but the quality of crops are quite less. So here are a few differences about traditional method of farming and modern method of farming. Now let's look at some of the farming practices related to rice cultivation with regard to traditional and modern method of farming. Now here are a few farming practices. So in traditional farming, when it comes to the choice of variety, farmers use traditional varieties, whereas in modern method, hybrids with high yielding and resistance to certain insect and pest. So, the varieties of seeds in modern method, they use high yielding seeds which is resistance to insect and pest. Then when it comes to nursery sowing, farmers they sow the rice seedlings on raised or flat lands, whereas in the modern method it is done on the raised nursery bed with adequate irrigation, fertilization and insect pest, disease and weed control method. And then land preparation is done through animals and human, whereas in the modern farming practices it is done mechanically. And then finally, when it comes to the transplant of the rice seedlings, it in the traditional farming practice it is done manually and at a randomly, whereas in modern method it is done through transplanters and it is done in a row. That is why in modern method we have high production of rice or any kinds of vegetables and crops when we use modern method of farming. So, you can look at the picture and then understand something there, because the upper picture shows that lots of labors are being used while preparing the land, whereas in the lower picture the tractor machine is used to harvest or to plow and to even to plant the rice. Now, let us look at some of the challenges to farming. When it comes to challenges to farming, considering the geophysical features of our country, it has both strengths and weakness related to agriculture production. With the mountainous ecosystem of the Himalayas, it has established a unique micro ecosystem with regard to both flora and fauna. For example, Bhutan is enlisted as 10th global hotspot of biodiversity with over 8,000 species of diversity, both flora and fauna recorded. And then with this we also have limitations because of our topographical features. And then in our country farmers also follow subsistence oriented farming practices, and to advance to the commercial farming we also need more land. Now, let us look at the challenges to farming one by one in brief. First one is socio-cultural limitation, then we have technological limitations, then we have institutional limitations, then farm labor issues or rural to urban migration, then we also have limited environment awareness, which also means human made disaster. Now, under socio-cultural limitations, the first one we have is low level of literacy. A very high percentage of a farming community is either not at all literate or have very low level of literacy. As a result, awareness on technological options and market is limited. With the improvement in literacy rate of farmers, their risk bearing capacity and awareness and want for information will increase. Because our farmers have low level of literacy, our farmers are unable to take the risk of adopting new technologies and new varieties of seeds. That's why they are unable to produce surplus production for sale. Then next one we have is when they are able to take the risks and if they are aware about the new technologies, this will lead to increased adoption rate of available technologies, which will in turn help the farmer target for producing surplus for market. Then next one we have is the subsistence nature of farming. So, subsistence we already discussed in our previous class. It means growing of crops and vegetables or rearing of livestock for our own personal use. Here, so farming in Bhutan is still largely subsistence oriented, with farmers producing enough for their family. Commercial agriculture is emerging slowly and is yet to make a break away from subsistence, where intensification with heavy technology will be the bottom line. Still, farmers in our country are following subsistence nature of farming. So, they just produce for their self consumption, they are not producing in a large quantity. So, if they change to commercial, then they can sell their surplus product and then they can also earn some income. Now, next one, let us look at the inheritance system with regard to land. The inheritance system with regard to land has led to land fragmentation for generations, making commercial agriculture very difficult. So, here we have a system of dividing the land among our siblings within our family members. So, when this is done, our lands year by year or generations after generation, our lands get the size of land gets decreased, whereas it is impossible to do commercial farming. For producing surplus that can be sold, a minimum area is required that will take care of family, food security and produce surplus for market. So, to go with commercial farming, we need to have a large acres of land, and this is not the case in our country because we have the system of land fragmentation. Now, let us look at the second challenges to farming, which is technological limitations. So, under this, the first one we have is options available to farmers in various eco zones. Due to the diverse agroecological conditions that Bhutan is blessed with, different micro ecosystems system specific to a locality. Developing a technology suited for a particular locality is the biggest challenge, as technology generation is the time consuming and research required is extensive. As we have 6 different ecological zones in our country, so to develop accordingly with regard to the locality, it is quite expensive and also it requires it is quite time consuming. Then next we have is adoption of technological packages. The recommended technological packages for production of a crop or rearing a livestock are rarely taken up in totality. Since our farmers are oriented with subsistence farming, they do not take any technological packages which is required for any types of crops and vegetations. So, example here is to plant a chili in a technological way, it should be planted row to row, plant to plant. So, there should be a sufficient distance, then they should also know when to do the weedings and when to apply fertilizers and all. But this is not taken because of subsistence oriented farming practices that are done by our farmers. Then we have pest causing damages and loss. So, there is no solution for all the problems like that. Damage and losses caused by pests like insect pest, weeds, diseases, organisms and vertebrate pests like wild boars and monkeys have to be addressed by various means. This means for managing such problems are sometimes beyond the affordability of our farmers, as much of our farmers are subsistence oriented. So, to control all these problems and damages, at times our farmers do not get time, and also it is unaffordable for them to take care of these problems. That is why at times there is less production. Then third one we have is institutional limitations. That means first one we have availability and access to agricultural inputs. So, our population is spread over mountainous terrain. The delivery and distribution of agricultural inputs like seeds, fertilizers, chemicals, tools and implements is a huge challenge. So, even if our people who are working in agriculture sectors, if they want to distribute hybrid seeds and fertilizers and chemicals and tools to our farmers, because of the scattered or scattered settlement, it is unable for them to give that services to the farmers. This has led to the problem of getting the required input in time in remote rural areas. Then we have access to market for the surplus produce. So, market and market network is still at infancy. So, it is still not properly developed. So, even if the farmers have surplus production, since there is no market facilities nearby or since there is no farm route, at times there are no farm routes in their villages. So, they are unable to sell their surplus product. As a population is scattered and connecting communities and villages involve very high investment requiring donors and financial institutes willing to provide the required fund. So, to have a road network connection connecting from villages to communities, there is a need of high financial support. Then we have farm labor issues, or which is also rural to urban migration. The factor contributing to rural urban migration is vast, because in urban centers we can avail all kinds of facilities. So, people tend to migrate from rural areas to urban centers. Due to the combination of unfavorable situations existing in the rural areas combined with opportunities that are available in the urban centers. So, in rural areas it is lacking of some of the facilities which are there in urban centers. So, people tend to migrate from rural to urban centers to avail that facilities. And younger generations with improved literacy rate tend to move to urban areas. So, when all the younger people, younger generations who has a literacy level, they tend to, when they tend to move to urban centers, only the old ones are left behind in the villages. So, to retain people in the rural areas, it should be a life and living friendly environment. So, if there are facilities which are available in urban centers, even in the rural areas, then people will stay there and then they will go ahead with farming practices for their livelihood. Then finally, we have limited environmental awareness, which is also a human made disaster. Environmental awareness amongst our general public is low and much lower in rural areas given their low literacy rate. More landslides and soil erosions are caused due to overgrazing, timber extraction and improper farming practices. So, here in the rural areas, since the farmers have low literacy rate, directly or indirectly they hamper our environment. And then when they do shifting cultivation, or when they do, sometimes they do overgrazing, and then when they sometimes with the excessive timber extractions, they do not know the effect on environment. So, it causes landslides and floods. So, to end the lesson today, we have discussed the major crops grown in Bhutan. Then we also learned the cropping pattern. We also discussed about the differences between traditional and modern method of farming practices. Then we also looked at some of the challenges to farming. As a follow-up activity, I have few questions for you all to do at home. So, first one is elucidate the main differences between traditional and modern farming practices in rice cultivation. Second one, how is the inheritance system of land a constraint to agricultural development in Bhutan? Then third one, how do you think cooperative marketing services will be applicable to our farmers? So, with this I come to an end of today's lesson. Thank you.